go. Okay, so I think we're live now. And hey guys, welcome. We got Richard with us. We're going Richard Smith, and we're gonna go. It's gonna be an honor. Let me unmute myself. Oh, there we go. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Typical Skeptic podcast. I'm really excited about my guest tonight. Great way to end off the night with my shows. Something I'm really into. Tonight we're going to be talking about human origins, alien contact, the hybridization. And I have with me Richard Smith. He's a lifelong experiencer, researcher, speaker, and author focused on alien contact, the truth about human origins, and what he calls the interdimensional hypothesis. He speaks about the connection between ancient civilizations, modern abduction phenomena, and a suppressed global narrative about the extraterrestrial presence on Earth. And his work aims to decode the hybridization agenda and the waking of humanity. And I just want to give a shout out to my good friend Brian Singh from Full Disclosure Now, and you guys can get your tickets at fulldisclosuremovement.org. He's the one who recommended Richard. So thank you, Brian. And yeah, Richard, thanks so much for coming back or coming on for the first time, man. How are you? And good to meet you.
It's good to meet you too. It's an honor to be on the show. Thank you for having me. Yeah, Brian's a cool guy. But I'm glad to be here. And like you said, my name is Richard Smith. I'm an author and experiencer. And I had my first official experience, or awakening, as I call it, at the age of 21. And that's when an extraterrestrial being, who I referred to in the books as the crone and describe her as a female praying mantis, made herself known to me. And it turns out that I really had known her already since I was 4 years old. Because at that point, all these memories that I thought were dreams were coming to the surface, and they weren't dreams. There was like a total recall, a cluster bomb of memories that came back. And that's how things began with what I referred to as the conversation all these years. That was when I turned 21. That was back in 1991.
Wow. And what came from that conversation? What do you remember?
So in that contact experience, she asked me, would you use your talents and skills to take downloaded information and turn it into your artwork? And I'll explain that in context, for mass communication, to teach the masses about what's going on. This was right at the time that I had decided to go back to college for my 4-year degree in visual arts. And she knew it. It was a great campus to do this with, because I had a professor who stuck behind me on it. His only mandate was, I don't want to see, in his words, any of this airy-fairy bullshit. You better make it serious and rock hard and, keep it down to earth. Because he saw what I was talking about, the politics, the economics of it all, and how it relates to social issues. So that's the part he got into. He says, you keep it in that realm, you'll be good. Okay, don't backpedal into the other stuff. And so he defended me for those 4 years, even when others were like, he's criticizing other people's religious beliefs. Yes, but he's doing it from the perspective of where those religious beliefs come from. So you can't really say no to that. That was the conundrum right there. And he stuck behind me all the way. But that whole series of artwork in college was completely devoted to extraterrestrial contact, the alien abduction phenomena, and extraterrestrial intervention in the long-term sense on behalf of the crone and the group that she belongs to, that I refer to in the book as the Sisterhood. And that's how that started. And then from the artwork came the speaking and the writing. And it just, over the years, it turned into the book series that I have now.
Wow. And tell us about your books. That'd be amazing.
The the main heart of the book series is the trilogy, which is titled The Moor, the Mason, and the Alien, Part 1, 2, and 3. Part 1 would be a call to action. Part 2 is a Vril manifesto. And Part 3 is called Rise of the Invisible College. And they're all linked together. And it's an evolution building up to what was the final part. The other two books in that series as well is the prelude to the trilogy, which is called Legions of Light, Armies of Darkness, and the experiences that my wife has always had in her book, The Kings Are Coming, in which she talks about everything that's been going on with her since childhood, her mom, and what happened when her and I met at that opening reception when I put on a solo exhibition with that first series of artwork at college. So that's, we met on December 11th, 1995. And that's a fascinating story in itself. We saw each other. We knew each other, even though that was the first time we met. And we shook hands, and there was a spark there. And for the rest of the night, I'm in a daze at the opening reception. Everybody's asking me questions about the artwork. Later on, I found out she went home in a daze. Doesn't even know how she got home because her mom was driving. So it had affected both of us equally. As time went on, we started developing a really good friendship out of that and comparing notes and realizing that we had both been in contact with the crone since childhood. And we were having crossover experiences because of it.
Yeah, wow. That's but my friend Michelle, she comes on my show. I have to tell you this. Like, she talks about the crone too, but a different kind, like a more evil version of the crone. She says that there's supposedly like a Luciferian brotherhood, and then underneath this Luciferian brotherhood is the crone. She's at the top of everything. She's like the main witch that these secret societies and stuff report to. Have you ever heard anything like this? Since you're I mean, yeah.
No, but in some Native American cultures, you will find the crone as well. And she is described in their culture very much like the way I describe the extraterrestrial being I'm in contact with, where she's a very harsh taskmaster, but also extremely protective. And, well, she'll be the eyes in the back of your head all the way through.
Wow. And like, how many experiences would you say you have? Like, how many contact, and would you say they were abductions, to where like you were being like used for hybridization purposes and stuff?
That's a good question. That was a realization that came at one point. I had, she had asked me early on, knowing the way my mom had raised my brother and I to be very outspoken about things, and to basically never back down, never be afraid, even through overwhelming criticism. The crone had said, "Would you be a voice for those that have no voice?" I said, "Sure." And it started out being a voice for all these alien abductees who had been shoved in a closet, marginalized, penned in to the point where they were ostracized by their families. They were too afraid to talk about it unless it was people like myself, like-minded. And then they would see me talk about my experiences, and they'd be like, "How do you have the guts to go up there in front of everyone?" And we're talking back in the 90s now, early 2000s. How do you have the guts to go up there and do that, knowing full well what might come of it?
Yeah, because can I say, Richard, I didn't mean to interrupt, but this was a whole different time. Like, like we're at a time now where we can speak openly about this stuff.
Right.
But, back in the early in the 90s and 2000s, like, I feel people like Dr. Carla Turner, the abduction researcher, was murdered. I feel like Dr. John Mack was murdered. So for people to come out about this stuff back then was a huge, huge thing. You had to have a lot of balls.
Right. And that's how it's, but then I started realizing there's a big difference in the experiences that Linda and I were having versus these experiences that seemed a lot harsher and more victimizing for these other abductees. So, I started realizing there was a division there of some sort, where you had now contactees and abductees, and they were, in the same camp but different. And some were being taken by, let's say, more abusive factions, malevolent factions that had their own means. That I talk about this in the book too, as far as what their agenda is. And then there were people like Linda and myself who were brought into the benevolent side of it to teach people how to stay, basically standing up to these oppressive forces, even in our own everyday society, whether it's economic slavery, civil rights, or this, or where this is going and where this is coming from in terms of the alien abduction phenomena. One of the tenets of my talks is that I get people to realize how their weekly paycheck is on the same plane of reality as a UFO, and there's no difference between the two. They coexist. And why? Because one gave birth to the other, for reasons that might not be so good. So this is where my experiences were more educational. It doesn't mean they were always happy, but they were educational. But it wasn't like being, let's say, slapped on the table and dissected, and they take my arm off, they put it back on, or things like that. That wasn't the case for us. In fact, experiences went as far as including my brother and my dad at times too. They would show up there. It seemed like my brother was very much working in the engineer capacity, repairing things. My dad would be there with me, or in other instances, it was Linda and I going out on a mission. And a lot of it had to do with protecting gifted children, hybrids, starborns, super psychic kids, indigos, things like that, because the opposing team, or the bad actors, were always looking to hunt them down and use them for their own means, which were never good, and basically turn them into something like a Manchurian candidate of sorts, if you want to call it that. So it was always our job to protect them and stop that wherever we could. So that's a lot of it right there, as far as the differences go.
That's fascinating. So I'm gonna start with the questions I prepared for you. Some of these dive into like human history, and we'll tie the abduction phenomena into this because I feel like it does tie in. You talk about rewriting human history. What's the biggest lie you feel like we've been told is about our origins as a species?
That one of the biggest lie is that our evolution on this planet hasn't been helped along. Like there hasn't been things sideloaded into the fossil record as we evolve, and with these sudden jumps and starts. Case in point, the Lucy ape turned all of archaeology and anthropology upside down, because the philosophy was that, the expectation was that you would first have to find a primate ancestor that would grow a larger brain before it learned to walk upright. The Lucy ape reversed all that and destroyed it. They found a primate with a smaller brain and a pelvic bone that basically learned to walk upright overnight on the evolutionary scale. Well, okay, well, where did that upright pelvis come from suddenly like that? So there's examples like that. You'll see in the rock strata of the earth, there's circuit boards and diodes and capacitors and other things that just don't belong there, that don't fit the timeline, right next to fossil bones. Well, what are those doing there? Oh, that's just an anomaly. That's nothing. Well, yeah, it's an anomaly. Now explain it. Where did it come from? And that's how you kind of back the academic world into a corner when they don't want to confront it. You'll find experiences like that with all these people who get into human origins like this. So that's one of the biggest lies of all, is that we haven't had extraterrestrial intervention right there alongside all along. Now, you introduce that into the conversation. Now, all of a sudden, you have common ground between what's been skewed as creationism and what has been going the wrong way in terms of evolution. Now, evolution and creationism have a common syntax, but ego gets in the way. I'm right, you're wrong. And so nobody bothers to consider the obvious elephant in the room, which is the UFO. So this is the biggest lie of all, is that has been stricken from the conversation, and that would answer everything.
I agree. I agree. And so, do you feel like we're a hybrid species ourselves? Do you feel like yeah, like you feel like we're definitely a hybrid species?
I think there's been a lot of mixing going on this planet. Other ancient astronauts coming here, some who came here of their own will, others who got stranded here by accident and couldn't leave. So this is where you see these growth spurts in society, these sudden jumps forward, these sudden engineering marvels such as the megaliths and the pyramids. And yet no one today seems to have the faintest clue how to replicate that building process to get it done. How did they drag materials from 100 miles away to the location where they needed it, where there was no means of actually transporting that, because every hypothesis that's been put forward doesn't work when it's when it's taken out to the production floor to actually test it out. So and it's not just the pyramids itself. It's the idea of knowing how to create an ancient battery cell. Well, someone would have had to teach us that. Okay. So there was a lot of teaching going on. It doesn't necessarily have to be any kind of genetic splicing or interaction. But no, I don't think we can just look at a chimpanzee, call that our cousin, and then not wonder how we are so vastly different in form and function from a chimpanzee by only 1 or 2 chromosomes. So
yeah,
how did that happen? I mean, if that's all it took to go from, and then why are the chimpanzees and the gorillas still here then? Because we're an offshoot of that common answer as well. Another experiment that was left to run, and hey, let's see what it does. Does it kill itself? Does it evolve? Here's that experiment going on, the what I refer to as an experiment in humanity.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%. What I was going to say was, in your view, who are the beings contacting humans? Are they all extraterrestrial, or some more interdimensional or ultra-terrestrial?
I think it's a mix of all three. The interdimensional ultra-terrestrial, I've seen the crone do things that makes me think she crosses over into that realm. Their ultra-terrestrials and interdimensionals have actively affected our evolution on this planet. There's a race of beings called the Ankyls, which is where we get the word angel from when it gets mispronounced over time. But these Ankyls were very much like an avionic race, ultra-terrestrials, mostly interdimensional, but they still kept their toe in the water here of the 3-dimensional universe. And they're the ones that gave us the gene for passion so that we could be self-aware and not walk around like mindless drones.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I agree. I would agree with you 100%. Yeah. And then, do you feel like ancient alien visitations connects with modern abduction cases? Like, do you feel like there's it's like a continuation in a certain agendas I'm sorry, continuation in certain alien agendas?
Yes, and there's this probably ties in with your other question, what's the biggest lie in history, is that we're going to find out that when it comes to official first contact, those that have been visiting us, they had much longer lifespans. Okay, their cell structure doesn't break down like ours. Ours is programmed to break down. And so they've been around for a long time, which stands to reason that the influence on ancient cultures is the same beings who are now visiting us today. Now that would be a real slap to the head to find out that the one that gave birth to your bloodline is the one you're going to meet today in terms of official first contact. And that's going to completely revamp our definition of a creator God. So there are two camps, though, and I refer to it esoterically as flesh and bone versus wood and stone.
Wait, so I got to ask you this, and do you feel like the extraterrestrials are creator beings?
Yes, in a lot of cases, and it may not. That initial creation started off as something beneficial, and then there were others who were very selfish of that, very jealous, who then moved in and saw the perfect opportunity to take that creation and turn it into an obedient slave. And so this is where this is why we have, truthfully, such a schizophrenic view of God. He's omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, and all that cancels itself out. Why? Because you've had all these different influences. Some of them were omnipotent, some of them were omniscient, some of them were omnipresent, and all that mixed together in the racial and cellular memory of our existence going way back in time. So now we have it very similar to Hitler's big lie theory or the telephone game. Here we are generations later, thousands of years later, and now we have this mixed up, botched up view of what God is because of all these extraterrestrial beings messing around with the gene pool and our society and our sociological evolution.
I like that. Yeah, I would agree. And so do you see ancient abduction cases? Do you feel that there were ancient? I mean, like, have they been doing this hybridization? So, okay, here's what I don't understand. So, like, if they created us, like, why would they still be wanting to hybridize with us? Or like, what? Or, I mean, I've heard different things like that they were creating hybrids for a failsafe, and like, in case like we blow ourselves up here from a nuclear war. That's kind of common. You hear that in ufology, but like I've always wondered what the hybrids were for, where they were storing all these hybrids, and like maybe that's a better question. Yeah, like do you have any insight on that?
Linda and I feel like the hybrids, in the good sense, represent the in between. They're not exactly alien. They're not exactly human. They exist as their own thing. And that seems to be the new generation coming about for whatever changes might take place on this planet or adaptability on another planet, just in case, like you said, as a backup plan. Okay. The other side of it has more to do with an investment in tradable commodities throughout the solar system, of which our planet has a lot of rich and tradable commodities that let's say the more malevolent factions have always envied and have always fought over. And it follows the law of feudalism in any solar kingdom or solar system per se. There's always one planet that's going to be the throne of power that has control over all these other chunks of real estate that we refer to as planets. And that throne of power is Earth. So that tends to go a long way to explaining why they all like to come here. Because the bad guys will come here, and then the good guys will come to try and offset that influence. Okay, as the story goes, the good ones did approach President Eisenhower first. He rejected that because of the request for nuclear disarmament. And then the bad ones came and said, we'll show you how to amp up those atomic bombs and make them even more powerful. So, that's the conflict right there. The ones I mentioned earlier, flesh and bone versus wood and stone. Flesh and bone represents the good guys invested in our equilibrium with the planet. Are we taking care of the planet? Are we worth being allowed to inherit the planet as the caretakers, which we are in the first place, but we haven't woken up to that fact, that legacy, that starborn legacy? And then there's wood and stone, the ones invested in the property and real estate that the slaves live on, and we're seen as chattel, as attachments to that land. And from chattel, it's a real estate term for cattle. That's where you get the word cattle from. So you have these two sides of it, and it will get to a point, as it's starting to now with things like UAP disclosure, congressional disclosure, that now we're at a spot where nobody can laugh at it. Okay, now the news media has to take it serious because Congress has exposed the fact that we have a government within a government, the intelligence community, that has decided to tell Congress to drop dead and play it close to the chest. Well, something's going to have to change about that, and someone's going to have to be forced into giving up the ghost on that, because the Star Nations or the benevolent factions of the Star Nations are not going to put up with that garbage, because that is holding back the ability for the human race to legitimize their own starborn legacy and the fact that we are the inheritors of this planet. We are the caretakers of this planet. But unless you wake up to that, all you're going to know is your day job and your paycheck, and that's it.
Yeah, I agree. And then you said there's a spiritual component to this contact. Are we looking at it like a soul contract level arrangement or something like that?
Yeah, the interdimensional hypothesis is, in some sense, you could see it as guerrilla warfare. Okay, trying to slip past the influences that have come from the top down and do it as a groundswell, a movement from the ground up with common everyday people. And that means that it may not necessarily be direct physical alien contact, but more so based on the frequency of your mind communicating with you energetically or spiritually or metaphysically. Crop circles are prime examples of that. That's a form of guerrilla warfare. And that's how the good guys are getting to the people without having to violate any protocols with bypassing the governments of those people. Whereas the governments are starting to wake up that they've been listening to the wrong factions all along.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, but why don't the positive ones interfere? Would you say? What would you say about that? Sorry, I was looking at my questions.
Yeah,
What
that's okay.
why don't the positive ones interfere? Like, we hear stuff about Star Trek. They'll say that there's a non. Okay, I know that's Star Trek, but you still hear that like there's a non-interference clause that the positive ones have. And I've thought about this a lot. I was like, wait a minute, there's so much suffering here on Earth. You know what I
Right.
mean? It seems
Yes.
sometimes it feels like we're in a hell realm. You know what I mean? And I know a lot of people who don't want to come back here. Like, a lot of people who research like the soul trap, and they feel like that, like, that we're in some kind of like soul trap here, like that we're being reincarnated over and over again, used like batteries, and that we're
Yeah.
like, I'm sure you've heard this, like, but like, so like, and then a lot of people just don't want to come back to Earth again. They're saying like if they have their choice, they want to go somewhere else instead of reincarnating here because there's so much pain and suffering. But like, so why do you feel like the positive ETs can intervene in that sense? I mean, I know there's like authors like Preston Dennett, by the way, like big shout out to Preston. I like him. He talks about a lot of positive contact, and he feels like a lot of the negative contact and a lot of that stuff that I just said is put out there as misinformation because he feels like it's actually more positive contact, and he feels like the ETs do intervene and they do heal people and stuff like that. It's just certain people, and he's written books about that. So like, there's two sides of the spectrum. That what do you feel about that? What I just said.
That's actually a good question to bring up. A couple of things about that. One, there's the straightforward answer of self-determination, your own destiny, your own fate. If they were to come down here and solve everybody's problem, it would basically just dispel our entire legacy on this planet, our entire history. There's no point to us existing if someone else is going to come down here and wipe our asses for us.
Yeah.
So as far as this being a hell zone, that's the learning period. That's the wake-up call. Doesn't have to be a hell. Doesn't have to be pain, because that's all a state of mind. And the more people remain in denial of the bigger picture, waiting for them out there, the more that they're hunkered down or just absorbed into their smartphone all the time, or absorbed into their day job all the time, or this, that, and the other thing, or some stupid family drama or some idiot thing going on TikTok, which is a complete waste of time. that stuff is designed to drag you down, and keep you occupied with ego instead of with your spirit. Okay, or that awakening of the gene for passion, which became something I won't throw that into the mix because that'll throw the conversation off the rails, but it does turn into something else that I talk about in the books. And as far as Star Trek goes, since you brought it up, I talk about that heavily in part 3, Rise of the Invisible College. The role that Star Trek played in this whole thing of waking up humanity. So in terms of positive contact, movies, TVs, okay, once again, just like crop circles and interdimensional contact through frequency, energetic, spirituality, and so forth, that television set, that movie screen, that's yet another thing that has been utilized by the benevolent factions and Mother Earth, believe it or not, to wake up the human race through that safety buffer of sci-fi. And yet we're realizing now there never was any such thing, excuse me, there never was any such thing as science fiction at all, okay? I mean, you look at Star Trek, the original series and the communicators they have, it's like, yeah, we bypassed that in the 90s with those old flip cell phones, okay? Now we have a smartphone that just has a touchscreen, which is more like Dr. McCoy's tricorder, all right, nowadays. So there are things about science fiction, as well as lots of other ones, not just science fiction, but that's the predominant one, where the foundation has been laid to wake us up. You talk about how children might be getting raised in such a way to be lifted off the planet to a backup planet, Earth 2. The movie Knowing with Nicolas Cage was all about that. That big reveal at the end. Where did the children go? And they go to this planet of Eden, where they were released untainted, no sense of adversarial, tribal, factional, I'm better than you, and let them start over there. The story now, polar opposite to that is the other one called Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke, which they also made into a movie on Hulu, I think, or Amazon. The book was written in the 50s. It was the only one of its kind that Arthur C. Clarke ever wrote that way, and he never went back to writing in that vein again. He went a different way with his science fiction, but it's a real kick to the gut when you get to the end and realize that form of official first contact was all about summoning the children away because they gave us everything we need to live a healthy life for maybe one generation, and then all of a sudden the other shoe dropped and they realized why they're here, which brings up another point. What if psychologically we're not ready to see what they look like? What if we are so hung up on our ridiculous religious archetypes of what a devil is, what an angel is? What if it turned out that the angels were the scumbags and the ones that look like demons were the good guys? We wouldn't be able to accept that. Psychologically, we would have a complete psychological schism over that. That just wouldn't compute. So the other one learned in Childhood's End is that they made an entire generation go by before they revealed themselves. Why? Because the first one that walks out off the deck of the ship looks like that traditional gargoyle, demon, devil, Satan, okay? But that new generation was ready to accept that and not get bogged down by ridiculous superstition that was invented by the bad guys for the sole purpose of controlling that. Now, I'm not saying that's the way it is, but that's the lesson learned. What if what comes off that ship or what comes down from the sky is so psychologically and emotionally overpowering that all it does is, put half the human race into a coma? That's not going to work. Now you've instilled fear just by your presence, or it goes the other way. Maybe the other half of the human race now starts worshiping you because they didn't learn a damn thing and they're looking for someone to solve all their problems, which goes back to what I said before. If they did that, your existence is useless. and they end up turning them into gods and worshiping them. Well, now you're back to square one with factions hating factions and warring with each other, and who the favorites are and who the outcasts are, and the nebulous them, that's the enemy. These are all the problems that come into play with, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. It just goes back to that. So there has to be a wake-up call on this planet first, with at least 80% of the population. Doesn't have to be 100%, but at least 80. And when that wake-up call comes, if the malevolent factions don't get the memo on that, and then they try to reveal themselves in a more forceful, belligerent manner to enforce their will, that's the point where the benevolent faction will step in and say, hey, you're violating the contract. They woke up. The planet belongs to them. Pack your things and get the hell out. That's what it's come to.
Wow, that's fascinating. This is fascinating. I'm not sure if you write about this, but I know you're friends with Brian, so I'll ask you this. Do you have any opinions on the secret space program and the history of like reverse engineered technology, as far as how long we've actually had it, who's had it, maybe the Nazis, maybe us. People talk about Solar Warden, people talk about the Nazis are out in space. Like, do you have an opinion on this, and like, what do you feel?
Yeah, it goes back to that famous line that comes out of the Invisible College in the movie Contact with Jodie Foster, where the dubious corporate titan H.R. Haddon says to her, "Why have one when you can build two for twice the price? Only this one can be kept secret." He was talking about the two different space programs, the legitimate tin can one, and then the other one with reverse engineered technology that we're not supposed to have. So there's definitely that going on behind the scenes. It's apparent that they're not just going to let this captured technology, whether it's a crashed UFO or something they found in the rock strata or down in Antarctica or up in the Arctic, they're not just going to drag it back to a warehouse. They're going to try and reverse engineer it and turning it into something useful for us. Problem with that is it's not really for us. It's for that military mind that we try to twist everything into. That military paranoia of how can we use this to our advantage to destroy them. Now, them could be anything from China to Russia to the aliens in space, okay? And that's a big problem, too, because tying it all together, if the benevolent factions came out, we would be forced into a narrative that says they are the enemy, we need to blow them out of the sky. And therein lies a problem because psychologically, that's going to expose the fact that the military cannot handle that. And that puts us back into a state of fear because we have a lot of people out there who think, oh, the military will protect us. They're actually that naive. Okay. Yeah. And to break that psychological expectation is not a good thing for a whole lot of people right now, especially in the current political climate. So there is a secret space program. I think it's supposed to act like a halfway point between governing officials and, obviously the wealthy that can get up there, the unknown wealthy, the people you'll never see with these extraterrestrial beings. But it leads me to wonder who's communicating with who up there and for what reason. I personally feel it's the benevolent factions that are telling these guys, look, you can't have it your way anymore. And these are the changes coming down the pike. Now, through your own self-determination, how are you going to bring this about? We'll work with you, but if you don't do it, we'll find somebody else to work with. And this is the sticking point that these elitists are walking into with the secret space program. So on the flip side, you also have the fact that we have this evolution of the fear factor on this planet. Initially it was the Cold War, the big bad Ruskies. They were going to blow us to smithereens, right? Yeah. Then it turned into the war on drugs. Oh my God, there's drugs coming into the country. Drugs have always been here, okay? And that war on drugs was lost 20 years ago, and the amount of money we blew on that went nowhere. Taxpayer dollars up in smoke, accomplish
And
anything.
honestly, Richard, from what we know now, we know the CIA was funding the war on drugs on the other side. They were flooding ghettos with crack cocaine and then arresting people for using it and selling it. Like, and one of those was George Bush's father. He was like, I think he was head of the CIA when that happened. Like, and that's what's going around the conspiracy community. I don't know. But I think that's for real. You know what I mean? So it's like,
And then
I
what
don't
came
know.
out of that? Yeah. And what came out of that was after the war on drugs wasn't fooling anybody, then it was warped into the war on terror.
Yeah.
And now there were terrorists everywhere. And I'm sure there are. There's plenty of bad actors who need to be pushed off the edge of a cliff permanently. But truth be told, it became a catch-all excuse. They're out to get us. Excuse me, where do you live? You live in some backwater town. They're not going to bomb you, okay? That's not the problem, all right? But we're all brainwashed with that. Oh, they're going to get us. Well, when we started waking up, now here we are 20 years later after the World Trade Center disaster, we're realizing, well, that was a lot of BS, okay? When you start adding up the pieces that didn't add up. And now, so the next big thing is what? And this is something that Stephen Greer has said over and over. Well, the next evolution after the war on terror, since there's nothing else to really turn into a war on anything at this point, is up in space to create a fake alien invasion. That would be the next level to take that fear factor too.
Yeah, I got a question. I got to ask you a question. I can tell. My accent. I have a Pittsburgh accent, so I'll tell you that right off the bat. I'm from Pittsburgh, PA, but I know East Coast people because I'm from the East Coast, and it seems like you're either from New York or Jersey. Is that true? And if you are, I'd love to know your opinion on 9/11.
My wife and I originally, yeah, we're from New York. Yes.
I knew it. Like,
yeah.
I can just tell by your voice. You know what I mean? Like, New Yorkers have a certain accent, but if you're used to it, if you're like an East Coast person, like, you're just used to it. It's not a bad thing. Like I said, I have a Pittsburgh accent, and I don't like my accent. I mean, I think Pittsburghers are. I don't know. It's Yeah, but I mean, it's funny though. But like, so do you have an opinion on 9/11? I mean, like on the official narrative versus like the awakened narrative. Once you find out that there might have been other stuff happening besides what we've been told.
To move the wheels of the agenda forward, you had to have that flashpoint, that trigger point, and we are. In this stage, we're the most powerful country on the planet. We have become an empire, maybe not so much in the bad sense of the word empire, but let's face it, we are modern day Rome, okay? There's no denying that. And to think that a bunch of guys who no one could get their names straight to begin with, okay? You had like 3 names for each of them, fumbling around in the news articles all the time, who's who. You had to keep a scorecard. It just seemed to me that these people were invented. I'm sure maybe some of them were real because you can always throw in a few real people to give you that sense of this is all real. But the way the World Trade Center came down, the controversy over the size of the hole in the Pentagon, okay, none of these things added up, and the videotapes that were of the Pentagon that were filmed by a gas station that had seen what was really going on, those tapes was confiscated, okay? The fire inspectors and fire officials who have talked about and criticized the way the World Trade Center came down have said, we heard the explosions from the inside, not from the outside. And then you have that infamous audio tape of, I can't remember his name, the guy who originally owned the World Trade Center, okay? You have his voice on the phone saying, okay, drop it. And that was Building 7. And all of a sudden, Building 7 comes down. The point is that a lot of people made money off of that disaster on the stock market, okay? A lot of people used it as an agenda to push forward the fear factor. It's like, oh, because at that point, everybody lost their mind, and legitimately so. Okay, an event like that, my brother, thank God, he has always worked as a contractor, truck driver, deliveries. I thought he was in the city because his run usually took him into the city right by the World Trade Center. So when I'm watching this on TV, I'm going into a panic myself. I'm trying to get him on the phone. Cell phone activity was botched up left and right. And I finally got him on the phone. He says, yeah. He says, I was halfway there. I saw what happened. And I turned around and went back home. He says, I'm not dealing with that. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, think of all the family members that died there. The rather bizarre controversy over where was everybody in all these other offices. Why did only about, I shouldn't say only, but why were there 3,000 people who died when on any given day there were a lot more in that building? Where was everybody else? Did they all get a phone call and say stay home? So
what's interesting about that? They say that Israel put out something to the people, to the Jewish workers that were working that day, which I don't know if that's true. I think that's, you hear stuff in conspiracy sometimes. You know what I mean? Like I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it was something about the Israelis or something like that. Wasn't that the conspiracy? I'd have to look that up. I'd have to look that up.
Something to that effect. My concern is, I'm glad. I wish everybody had stayed home that day. So I'm glad it wasn't as bad as it could have been, because it was already pretty awful.
But that's what I wanted to say real quick before we go any further. I just want to say this for the YouTube people. We have a lot of sadness for the people that lost their lives in 9/11. Richard's an ex-New Yorker, so I felt like he could speak about this. I don't want YouTube to take the video down. We speak from a place of solemn sadness, and we're just questioning the official narrative. You're not making like wild conspiracies that could get the video taken down. And I do feel bad for everybody that lost their life that day. They say there was people like jumping out of the buildings and stuff because it was the fire. Like I can't even imagine having to like do that. That's just horrible.
I think the overall thing that was going on there is it set the wheels in motion that were necessary to get us to where we are now. And so there's always been that presence behind the scenes working at all these machinations in a forward motion. And I described them in the book as the Chetu regime. And over time, that word Chetu became mispronounced as shadow. Since they've been the reigning government on this planet, it became mispronounced as shadow government. And that's where that term comes from, these bad actors behind the scenes. And so I bring up the question in the book, well, you might be asking, what do they look like? Well, they happen to look like something you've known already in ufology and alien contact. It's the ones you traditionally refer to as the grays. But I go one step further, because there's a lot of those xenotypes out of there that it's unfair to use that blanket term. All right. It would be like me referring to everyone in Asia as, Japanese. That's just the farthest thing from the truth. Yeah. So I'm describing what I officially call the grays, these cybernetic organisms, superhuman, these supercomputers on two legs that have that hive mentality of calculating mathematically every last probability factor right on down the line for generations to come, and then acting on it. Okay. And there have been things throughout history that have tripped them up. Okay. People who work with the sisterhood have tripped them up. The female principle, the vril power, which I talk about in book 2, that has messed up their calculations along the way, but they still keep going at it. When I see things going on in certain economic or political circles that are heading down a very dark road, I'm like, yep, the Chetu regime is on the move again. They are moving their chess pieces around on the board, pulling strings, pushing buttons, And when you step away from it and you can see how the game is playing, you spot it right away as to what they're up to. So, this is, they want control of the planet because they see it from the perspective of wood and stone. They see it as a chunk of real estate. It's a tradable commodity. It has a lot of rich resources. They're not about to give it up as Richard Dolan once said, people in power are not going to give up that power willingly. So they're going to have to be strong-armed in some way, legally or otherwise, to give it up, or convinced that it's a no-win scenario. You're not going to win. Give it up. Okay, it's done. Game over. Move on. But the grays that I describe in the book, specific, very specific. Okay, because I don't want anybody thinking I'm talking about their experiences with Zeta Reticuli or the Ponti or any like that. They work directly for the reptilian queens of the Orion Empire.
You know what? It's so interesting. I was going to say, I was going to bring up the movie Jupiter Ascending, because I love that movie, you know, and in that movie, it seems like the Greys are working for the reptilians, and then the reptilians are working for like a human race that remind me of the Anunnaki, you know, and I was like, I wonder if this is how it's really structured in real life, you know?
So I know the people who wrote that movie and did it are the same ones who did The Matrix. Okay, the Wachowski.
Yeah, the Wachowski.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And I loved it too. Was not received very well, but I'm not, you know, usually what ends up being something I like is something that the rest of the public is going to dump. So
me too.
I thought it was excellent. And it got right into the Invisible College. In fact, I had people joking with me on Facebook when the movie came out. They were like, Rick, they read your book and turned it into a movie, because it seemed like it came straight out of my book. So I'm glad they did it, though. It was a great story. It got the message out there that this is about real estate investing and the economics of tradable commodities. I wish people would understand that better, because you look at economics, you're seeing all the dirty secrets of the history on this planet. There's nothing boring about economics. That's where everything falls between the cracks, the devil in the details. And this even came out, George Lucas put this forward in the prequels with the banking syndicate. Everybody's like, why is that in there? Well, that was a key part of the story, and I understood why he put it in there for the same reason that they did in Jupiter Ascending. So I appreciated that, even though the average Star Wars fan was kind of went right over their head. So, but that's another thing. He was trying to put it out there. Look, this is the cabal behind the scenes, being funded by the banking syndicate. So, and the cabal being the Sith. Yeah. So there's a lot that comes out of the Invisible College if you know what to look for and how to look at it.
Wow. This has been a fascinating interview, Richard. This is amazing. Like, I'd love to have you back for a part 2. And do you want to tell people where they can find? Thank you, first of all. And do you want to tell people where they can find the book and find your set of books, and how they can contact you if you want to be contacted? And again, thank you so much. This was amazing. I really enjoyed this.
Great conversation. I'd love to come back again. But people can find me at our official website, ufoteacher.com, all one word. It's right there on the screen, actually. That makes it easy. The website has our books on there that you can purchase. And the books are on the main page. There's also a book link at the top for the book specifically. Wherever the books are pictured, you can click on and purchase them, and we'll get it out to you. People can find me not only at the website, but you can find me everywhere on the internet just by using the term UFO teacher. Okay, it comes up everywhere: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, everywhere. Okay, it's been out there since the 90s, so it's pretty well saturated throughout the internet, and it makes it easy for people to find me.
Yeah, that's amazing. This was an amazing interview, and I really enjoyed this. And I was just checking for the audience. I'm supposed to have a really big guest tomorrow. I'm seeing if she emailed me now. Nothing yet, but I'm waiting for her to email me to, so I can set up the link for tomorrow. But there's a chance of having a really big guest tomorrow, guys. And I'm not going to say who it is because I don't want to mess it up. But, hopefully we have, but I'll be back tomorrow either way, and thank you so much, Richard. And that's it for me for tonight, guys. And everybody have a good night. I'll see you tomorrow. Take care, guys. Good night.